Welcome to Journey with Lay podcast. We discuss leadership, culture, and how to take your business to new heights. Your host, Lay Wang, is an adventurer, motivational speaker, and executive coach. Join us each week to learn how you and your team can reach your highest aspirations. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey everyone, Lei Wang here, host of this show. This episode is brought to you by Journey with Lei, where I help business leaders create a culture of excitement, build highly engaged teams, and consistently perform at their peak. Start tapping into your powers of excitement and take your business to new heights today. Go to journeywithlei.com or email hello@journeywithlei.com. Before introducing today's guest, I want to give a big thank you to Allison Devine. Allison is a speaker, author, and the kind of leader who truly leads by example. She leads by lifting others up. Thank you, Allison, for setting such a good example for all of us. And because of Allison, we all get to meet today's special guest. The guest is Shannon Polson. Shannon is an author, speaker, and if you look at her picture, you're literally going to think, oh, this is a female Top Gun, because she literally is. She is one of the first women to fly the Apache helicopter in the U.S. Army. Today, she is going to share with us the leadership lessons she learned from leading in the most male-dominated organization in the world. Hi, Shannon. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here. I know you just wrote a new book, The Grit Factor. Tell us, what's it about?
Yeah, the grit factor, I'm so pleased that it's out in the world right now and already changing lives across the country and around the world. And it came about because a young lieutenant reached out to me a number of years ago after I had left the military and asked if I would mentor her in the same process, in the same journey that I had gone on that many years before. And I said, of course I would. But then I started to doubt myself because, although I had the chance to be one of the first women to fly the Apache, I had then transitioned through my MBA at the Tuck School at Dartmouth and had led outstanding teams in the corporate world as well, in the medical device industries and the technology industry. So I've been out of uniform for some time. And so I decided to try to figure out a way to scale what I offered to this young leader. And I began several years of interviewing leaders in the vanguards of their fields. They happened to be women and they happened to be military. Every single one of them faced what the Stanford law professor Deborah Rhodes would call a double crucible, both the challenges of the job at hand, as well as the challenges of negotiating in an environment which was sometimes hostile to their being there. So after those years of interviews, I started to put them together, started to synthesize those key findings, those key lessons learned, and then do the supporting research. And that came out as what I now call the grit factor: courage, resilience, and leadership in the most male-dominated organization in the world. That, of course, is the military. And the lessons broke out into what I call the grit triad: commit, learn, and launch, which is that grit is not this discrete thing that you pull off the shelf for mile 23 of the marathon or 25,000 feet on Everest, right? But it's actually something that is integral to the content of our character, the fabric of our character. And that means we have to do the work, and we have the opportunity to do the work, to own our past, to deeply engage in the present, and then to look towards the future with that foundation.
That's great. So I know right now you are actively speaking and training in the corporate world. So I wonder, how does that translate into the normal daily life, who most of us only live in this mundane life? So how does that translate?
Well, you know this very well from your experiences on high peaks and translating that. It all comes down to, and as I speak to corporate audiences and do keynotes again to large groups around the world, we start by saying we're going to take a journey. We're going to take a journey to all of these different places. I led different line companies on 3 different continents around the world. And Yet at the same time, the most important journey we're going to take is that one that goes deep inside, right? It's that one that goes deep into our own hearts, because it's the place that we find what we need to lead ourselves in challenging times and times of change, and what we need to lead others. That's a journey into our own hearts. That's where we find that thing that I have always called grit, that is so critical to our success. So the grit factor is all about making the translation through story. And again, there's dozens of leaders that are part of this cohort of leaders in the grit factor, and many, many more that are going to be part of the next initiative to follow on. But they are really sharing stories and lessons learned, because we enter into our learning through story. And so we tell their stories, and then we go into the research, and then we go into very tactical takeaways that you can apply no matter where it is that your leadership journey is taking you.
I love that. So we all love to hear stories. So what is the one that deepest in your heart, resonate strongest in your heart among all the stories?
Oh boy, that's a high bar. Well, what I might do, because again, I tell these stories in keynotes and in the book, in the Grit Factor, and in the leadership journeys that I do through the Grit Institute as well. But one of the things that I have people do as they start to look at who they really are, like how do you show up as who you are in the way that you're meant to best contribute to the world? I ask you to go back and think of a story in childhood that really resonates and continues to resonate, because those stories that both we hear and we live early in our lives continue to have resonance throughout our lives and in very significant ways. And I tell this story actually in my first book, which is called North of Hope, about an expedition in Alaska's Arctic, which is a very different kind of a book. It's a memoir, so it's all story, right? But one of the stories that I tell in that book was when I was a young girl playing soccer on the girls' club soccer team, nothing like these soccer teams that they have today, right? These highly competitive teams, but just the girls' club soccer team in Anchorage, Alaska, where I grew up as a young girl. And I was a fullback. And there was a forward on our opposing team who ended up later being on the national ski team. And she would charge down the middle of the field. And, we would part like the Red Sea, right? She'd score on goal every single time. And I remember after one game, my dad came up to me and he put his arm around me and he said very kindly, it wasn't in any way pushy or demanding. He said, wow, that girl, Megan, she sure runs that ball down the field. And I said, yeah, she's really tough. And he said, well, why don't you run back at her? And I looked at him like he was crazy. And then the next game we played, she came charging down my side of the field. I was right fullback. She came down her left field. And I charged back at her. I have no idea where I even found it in me, except for that suggestion that my father had made. And we collided midfield and we fell on that rainy, muddy soccer field. And all of the soccer parents were silent, which never happens. It never happens, right? And we got up. And she never charged my side of the field again. And I think of that often, right? Of those lessons that we learn early on that we take with us about pushing through when we think that we can't push through, or charging at something that we think we have no opportunity to possibly be successful at, and how important it is to make that attempt. And I think that story has resonated with me ever since I was 9 or 10 years old.
Wow. So would you say that shaped how you were able to succeed in the military, in the corporate world, in today's market? Like, did that shape your whole life journey in some way?
I think so. I mean, all of our stories shape us and put us on a slightly different trajectory, right? And that doesn't mean that you can't change that trajectory. That's one of the big things that I emphasize in chapter 1 of the Grit Factor. We talk about owning your own story. And that is looking at the entirety of your lifeline to date, not looking yet into the future, and saying, hey, what's influenced me? Where have those inflection points been? And some of them will be negative, right? And some of them will be positive. And you have to decide which ones you're going to take with you. You get the opportunity. You don't erase your past. You don't ignore that something happened, but you have the opportunity to decide which pieces of that journey you want to take with you to continue to shape your life. And that's one of those pieces that I decided that I wanted to take with me. It certainly impacted me then. I think it continued to, along with many, many other experiences, continued to set me on trajectories that led me to challenge myself and to challenge things that seemed that they needed to be challenged.
Yeah, I like that how our childhood experience, when we take it in the right perspective, actually has such a deep impact in all our life. Like when I was like after I finished my Everest, when I'm writing my book, people always ask me like, were you always like that? Or like, did you grow up like that? I said, no. And I'm also kind of curious myself, like, why someone like me who is a book nerd would go on to climb Everest? And why other people say it's pain? I always ask them like, why do you think that's pain? That's enjoyable. That's what I like. So I was trying to look back at that time to understand who am I, why I like this kind of thing. And it turned out it's true that when I was young, I realized when I was young, when I was injured, hurt myself or something, even though I cry, I don't cry as a disaster. I just, it's just a sharp pain. But then after that, I go, okay, suck it up. Keep going. For me, like since I was young, I got that attitude that, it's nothing. It's just a part of the journey. You walk, you fall, you broke something, and you bleed a little bit. Then, well, life has to go on after that.
That's right. No, you're absolutely right. And it's interesting. I've talked to, as I did these interviews of these leaders for the Grit Factor, to write the Grit Factor and see kind of what those commonalities were in those stories. There was some disagreement on this idea. A couple of leaders thought, you know what, grit is something you just have. Like you learn it in childhood or you don't. You either have it or you don't. But there were very few that thought that way. And I disagree with that. I believe that even if you don't have those experiences, or if you have contrary experiences in childhood, I think you can decide at any point in your life that you're going to make an adjustment. You're going to build new experiences. You're going to push yourself out of your comfort zone. You're going to try new things or take on new challenges. And you can build that interest and that desire and that grit for those kinds of challenges later in life as well. And that, of course, translates from mountains to helicopters and the military to any part of our life that requires that kind of grit and resilience.
Yeah, I think that is a very important topic to discuss because we get to ask a lot, like, were you born with that, or you got trained, you learned to grow from that? So from my experience, I'd like to hear your side too, is I feel every one of us, when we were born, we have some factor in it. And whenever you strengthen that a little bit, yes, everyone's going to cry, everyone's going to scream out of pain. But when you strengthen that muscle a little bit, every time you get stronger and stronger. I remember when I was training for Everest, at the beginning, I thought, oh, I'm strong enough, I'm tough, I feel like I'm good enough to climb Everest. And after I trained for half a year, and my trainer, Dave Mimon, he's an awesome trainer. He's yelled at me all the time, like saying like I'm not trying hard enough. I was like feeling desperate. I feel like, am I just not built for that or something? Like, am I not strong enough? And he told me, no, physically you're strong enough, but your weakness is in your mental strength, and you can train for that. So that was the most valuable lesson I learned from my trainer is physically we're not weak, but mentally it will hold us back, but we can all train and gain. I think that's tied to your grit factor, how grit can be cultivated, strengthened.
Yes. And, one of the things that came out of this is, and the science seems pretty clear that you can build grit and you can build resilience, right? And you can build that mindset of success and of positivity, which is necessary for that grit and resilience. But it's also, it is these small things. And again, looking at it in a more holistic system, right? As you build grit and resilience, there are some very specific things that you can do to address that. But you also want to look at the whole system. And I think that is where story and connecting to core purpose comes in as that deep foundation. That second part of the grit triad is learn, which is this deep engagement in the present that's building your team, like your trainer, for example, right? The team that you're going to climb with, the team that I flew with. So that's building your team and contributing to a team. It's learning to listen, to be an active listener, and it's building that mindset for success. And only with that foundation and that deep engagement are you ready to then execute, right? With audacity, with authenticity, and with adaptability. But there are very specific key things that you can do. And I've really drawn from the positive psychology work at University of Pennsylvania, which is also what the Army's Master Resilience Training Program draws from as well. And these very small and discrete actions that can be done, and you build them into what you do every day. And that builds the mindset and the mental toughness of grit and resilience.
Yeah, and I know you are doing the training in the corporate world right now. So
Right.
how are some like small actions a corporate leader can take to help build the grit in their own leadership in their teams?
That is a great question. And there's so many answers to that. This is the thing is, again, it's this system that you have to address. I will say that this last year, the things that actually the last year and a half, the things that have really resonated with corporate clients in particular has been work around purpose. And I think that's supported by the McKinsey work that has come out looking at 2020. I think the study came out in early or mid 2021, that really said that those employees that were the most engaged, that were the most able to continue to push through challenges, push through resistance, right? And there's a lot of it that we're all facing right now, are those that were connected to their own personal core purpose. And so one of the learning journeys that I have led now several groups through is called Paths to Purpose. And we take chapter 2 of the Grit Factor, right? Again, we're looking at the foundation of grit and resilience, owning your story, drilling down to core purpose or heart purpose. And we really blow out chapter 2. So we blow out chapter 2 into multiple approaches to purpose. Some of them are very targeted. Some of them are much broader. And that's been incredibly impactful work for, I think, people from all different walks of life, all different types of professions. And it's interesting to me that that's been really the desired focus in the last year and a half, and I think is continuing to be so into the new year.
I love that. So purpose, how, I wonder if you would mind to walk us through a case study of how you help an organization to go through this exercise of finding purpose, build the grit.
Yeah. And this is something that you can do at the individual level. And that is the first training that we do, right? The Paths to Purpose really is about taking a group of people, an organization, a company, whatever that group size is. It can be 3 and it can be 3,000. And really working down into owning our own individual core purposes first. It's that work that has to be done first before they connect to the organizational purpose. And that's a different sort of an exercise. So Paths to Purpose is really looking at the individual and allowing them to do that deep internal work that most of us have not given ourselves time to do. And, the story that I like to tell when I am working with these groups and also actually in my keynotes is when I was a young lieutenant and I had just been qualified in the AH-64A Apache attack helicopter, again, one of the first women to do so. I was assigned to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I was just this 23-year-old young lady, right? Newly trained to fly and lead. And I arrived to this aviation regiment, the 229th Attack Aviation Regiment. There's 2 battalions of helicopters and pilots. So there's 120 Apache pilots in these battalions. And I'm the only woman out of that 120. But still, I'm excited. I'm newly trained. I'm ready to fly. I'm ready to lead. And I'm assigned not to the platoon where I have the chance to fly and to lead and to develop leadership and to hopefully demonstrate leadership, but instead to a back office staff position. And I'm typing up the appendices to our battalion operations orders, usually after 6 o'clock when everyone else went home. And I did a great job at the work I was doing. I got great feedback, but I went to the captain I was working for and I said, "Sir, listen, I'm going to keep doing the best work I can at this typing, at typing up the appendices of the operations orders. But I wonder when that platoon might open up." And he looked at me and he said, "Lieutenant, the Army doesn't owe you anything." And I realized, although I'd done the work, although I'd earned the opportunity, it might not be forthcoming. So I went to see the major that we all worked for and said, "Sir, look, I'm going to keep doing the best job I can, but I think I can do more." And he looked a little surprised. And then he assigned me one additional duty after the other. And finally, I took that first flight platoon. Now, I tell you this before I get into purpose for 2 reasons. The first thing is you have to ask for what you want, right? And Major General Don Dunlop, I had the chance to interview for the Grit Factor, tells every young leader, never be afraid to ask for what you want. Never assume anybody knows what you want. But the second part is there was a whole year in that shop, right, where I was not doing what I wanted to be doing, what I thought I was there to be doing. And in that course of that year, I had to find some kind of strength to keep going, right? And that's where I say you've got to drill down to core purpose, because what was my purpose? What was my why? We've all heard about starting with why. It's a great place to start, but it's not strong enough to stand on. So why was I there? I was there to fly and fight the Apache. That's pretty good, right? But I wasn't doing that. I had very little opportunity to change those circumstances. So why? Force yourself to ask why again. Why? 5 times. I was there to fly the Apache. Why? I was trained to do so. Why? I had asked for, I had earned that opportunity. Why? I wanted to serve my country. That's pretty good, right? But force yourself to drill down to that 5th level why. Why? Because I wanted to serve. And service, again, goes back to my childhood, how I was raised. We were raised going to church and making food to bring to people that didn't have enough, and delivering groceries to people who didn't have enough to eat on Christmas Eve. Service was at the heart of how I was raised and who I was. And if I connected to that core purpose of service, that I was there to serve, I could get through that time of frustration and stagnation, that challenging long time before I was able to do that thing that I wanted to do. So that connection to core purpose is powerful. And it's really important that we give ourselves the time and the space to do the work to make that connection to purpose and then reconnect again and again.
Yeah, when I was reading your book, I just felt that part really resonated with me so well, because that actually was also part of, almost sound like I'm copying you, but also part of my book and my speech about the purpose. Yeah, because when I was on Everest, I had a hard time, because when I started, I was the slowest one, smallest one, weakest one. Like, everyone looked at me like, there's no hope. Who is this lady? Why is she here? She doesn't even belong here. Like, when I was walking towards the base camp, that the trekking part is not even the climbing part, it's just getting to the base camp. The team, one of the directors in the team, basically literally said to me, "You need to learn how to walk." Like, there's not a place for you, kind of thing. And I know that from everyone's eyes that I somehow doesn't belong here, because I was not strong enough as everyone else. Right. And on top of that, halfway through the expedition, I felt sick. I got a lung infection that I just barely can walk a few steps without stopping to cough, and I couldn't even speak. I lost my voice, so I had to be almost evacuated down to another village to recover, because I was really too sick at that time. And that time, while I was recovering in the village, all I could do was just taking medicine, sleeping, eating, resting, nothing else. At that time, every day, one of my teammates came by to say goodbye, not because say goodbye to me, because they're saying goodbye to the mountains. They are leaving the mountains. And I look at them like I didn't understand. I was like, this is really funny, this world, because they are stronger, they're more experienced, they're healthy. Why are they leaving? They say, I'm not good enough, or I don't feel I'm strong enough to climb this mountain. I don't feel like to continue. I'm like, then why I'm here? I'm sick, I'm weak, I'm slow, I'm least likely to succeed on this one. Why I'm here? Yeah. But I didn't quit at that time, even though on Facebook, a lot of people like concerned about my condition. Some of my friends even called out to say, hey, this is too hard. Don't be too hard on yourself. Maybe come time to go home. But I didn't quit, because at that time, like, I'm here. It's not just for my personal dream for the summit. Yeah, everyone wants the summit. That's maybe their why. They wanted their lifetime dream. That's their why. It's on their list or something. Sure. But I was there because my original motivation to climb was, I want to prove an ordinary person like me can do something like this, even though I look like not like an athlete, not like a climber, not like someone who are capable to climb Everest. But I want to be here to show people how far an ordinary person can go. Doesn't matter if I don't go to the top. I don't want to do my best. So that's why I just stayed and held on. And luckily, I recovered from my sickness, got back to the mountain, and the story turned out to be positive. But at that time, I was like, I have no idea if I would even get back to the mountain. So that's the hardest time is when the purpose serves most.
Yes. No, I think that's right. I mean, that's what you have to come back to again and again. And I love how you said that an ordinary person can do these hard things. And that is something that, as I talk to every leader of the Grit Factor, when I talk to audiences, they say, who who are these people? Who are these incredible leaders that do these incredible things? Like, read the stories. They're just like you. They're just like me, right? I mean, it is me because I wrote the book, but it is, but they're regular people, and they're all different walks of life. They come from backgrounds where some of them were super athletic and some of them weren't athletic at all. And so it really is about what it is that you are there to do and what your purpose is, right? And coming back to your purpose and then applying that to those goals when things get really, really difficult.
Yeah, definitely. And also, I think this also touch upon a point I also resonated well with your book is the fear part, because when we are facing big challenge, we dig deep into our purpose. That gives us the energy. But at the same time, that's the time you face the fear most. So
yes.
I want to hear your perspective, like how the fear propel the leader actually to succeed during that kind of hard time.
Yeah, fear is a tricky thing, right? And I think of fear as this big unwieldy thing that doesn't fit in our cockpits, right? You can see this little helicopter here. There's a little teeny cockpit and it doesn't fit in there. The only thing that fits are the two pilots and a small publications bag and a Diet Coke and a power bar. I've tried everything else. And fear is big and unwieldy, but it's something that every single one of us face. And every leader understands that failure is part of the path to success. They have to put themselves out there. They have to take risks, right? Things that make them feel really uncomfortable, things that they will fail at some point along the way. And that's a really scary thing for almost all of us. And yet we've got to be able to face that fear. And I remember at various points in my journey, it was asking for that first platoon. That was a scary thing to do. I was the only woman officer in that entire battalion, right? The only woman pilot and entire regiment. And to go up there as a junior officer and to challenge the captain and to challenge the major, not to challenge so much as to be asking for something as opposed to just kind of doing my thing in the corner. That was something I was afraid when I did that. And I was afraid when I asked for my company command, because I had to ask for everything that I did, everything I had the opportunity to do, I had to ask for after I had earned it and more than earned it, right? That's how it works in many cases. There are times when we were flying, when we were being locked on with hostile anti-aircraft radar, and that was terrifying, right? There's scary things that we face at various points in our journeys. And I like to think of it as a kind of resistance, because what do you do with resistance? Well, in an aircraft, what do you do when you take off? What do you do when you land? What do you do anytime you face resistance? You have to turn towards it and fly directly through it. It's the only way to face it successfully, is to turn into it and to move through it. And I know that every leader that I had the chance to talk to for the Grit Factor did that again and again. It doesn't mean it wasn't scary. It was absolutely scary. Sometimes it was kind of heart in your throat sort of scary, asking for something that you didn't think that somebody was going to support, or suggesting that something wasn't right when you were the one that was speaking up. But you have to be willing to take that risk. And sometimes that's a little bit of self-talk in advance, but at the end of the day, it's in the moment saying, I'm just going to do this thing. And it's sort of like jumping off the high dive, right? Or jumping off the cliff. You've got to be able to just put yourself there and then push through it. And when you do that, when you do hard things, the psychology of it all, the science of it all is that when you do hard things like that, you become better at doing hard things, right? When you take risks, you become better at taking risks and better at taking educated risks. And that's how we gain that wisdom of experience in that process.
Yeah. And do you have a kind of self-talk, the conversation with yourself in that situation? Like, how do you talk yourself out of it, get into action, even, oh, I'm scared?
Well, it's interesting. I don't have to do that anymore, which is good, I think. I mean, I have plenty of things that are challenging for me right now, but that is not one of them. I think I have built up a strong tolerance for taking risks, which has been something that I took on physical risks initially, and then I took on risks that were more kind of emotional, like writing a book is kind of a risk. You're putting yourself out there, right? My first book is a very personal book. North of Hope is an incredibly personal memoir. And so speaking like this, right? Speaking in front of a large audience is taking a very different kind of risk than flying in an imminent danger zone or where you have people that are trying to kill you, right? And so those are different kinds of risks, but by building up that risk tolerance over decades, literally, that's now something that I can do pretty well. I think that, again, I have other challenges, but But right now I know that if I am aligned with my purpose and my values, and that's the big key, right? Am I in alignment? Is this something that I want to take on as my primary focus right now? Then I move forward towards it. I don't hesitate at all. But that does take that lifetime of decades of building up that experience and that wisdom.
Yeah. I like how our ability to handle fear, how we can push through the resistance. It's similar like how you build the muscle of grit. It's like every time at beginning, the little step feels like a giant step. Then once you keep on going and going, you're going to walk through even not even feeling it. It's like people ask me all the time, oh, what's the most dangerous time on the mountain? I'm like, no, it's all same. Because it gradually, at first time, storm is scary. Next time you see you're on the high on the mountain, it looks scary. Then you see crevasse, you see avalanche, it feels scary. But once you are exposed to that more, every time you push through that kind of resistance, then become not just a part of the journey. I don't feel that's something special. It's you got to have this bad weather. You got to have this kind of danger to make it exciting. And you know how to handle it. You have the confidence knowing you can handle it. So not that like you are out there to seek that kind of thrill, but it's just a part of how you handle that, like daily driving, walking on the street. That's a kind of similar thing.
Yeah. And, I think the things that are that I still struggle with now, although I, again, have had enough experience that I've developed an understanding, I guess, of it, is when you are a change maker, when you're a leader, when you're doing things that are different than they've been done before, you're not going to have everybody on board. and there are some people that aren't going to like it. And I still struggle with that a little bit. That doesn't mean that I don't do it, because I understand when things need to be done and how they need to be done. But it can be challenging because, it's not like you're the swim team captain and everybody's excited to go to the swim meet, right? It's not like that at all. When you're making a change, it's hard. When you're initiating something new, when you're changing something up because something else hasn't been working, there are people who aren't going to go along with that, right? It's either changing their perspective too much, or it's making them uncomfortable, or it's pushing them in a way that they're not ready to be pushed. And there's always going to be somebody or a group of people. If it's a big change, it's going to be a big group that push back. And that's, I think, actually harder for me than getting in an Apache and flying. Getting in an Apache and flying, it was a calculated risk. I knew how to manage the aircraft. I knew how to do the mission, right? How to go on the mountain. Like, that's a calculated risk. When people start, that's the hard piece, right? Are the personal things, and leading change, leading an organization, leading an initiative. I think that's where things can get scary, and you have to learn simply to kind of steel yourself to that. Not, you have to listen, but steel yourself to that and to continue to move in the direction of success. And that, I don't think, has ever gotten easier for me. It's become more clear to me what needs to be done, but it's not become easier.
I totally agree. I also tell people, I say climbing actually is easy compared to leading in the real life, in the real business world. So complicated. And I know the time is kind of getting short now, but we touched upon the purpose, the fear. And I don't want you to spill the whole thing about your book here, but I'd like to share just a little bit high levels what makes a leader inspiring.
What makes a leader inspiring? And that's not something the grit factor goes into as much, but I will say that if I were to pull out pieces of the grit factor that are critical to being that inspiring leader, it is understanding that nobody does it alone, right? Like, you and I were both we always still are part of a team, even though it's a little lonely in the jobs that you and I are doing now. There's still a team, right? There's still other people that are involved. So you're part of a team, and you have to figure out how it is you're going to contribute and how it is you're going to be supportive of other people on the journey. And I love that you shouted out Allison at the beginning, because she connected us for this podcast and our shared work and shared focus. And that's an example of that, right? Of helping other people on the journey. So that's part of it, is how do you understand that you only work with a team? And if you're a leader, everything you do is based on how your team does. And what that means is you have to develop the most important strategic leadership skill. And this came out of every conversation with every senior leader that I've talked to. which is the skill of active listening. It's not the sexy stuff, right? It's not putting that ice axe into the wall of ice, and it's not lifting off the ground in the Apache. It's active listening to your people. And it's asking them questions. It's giving them space to answer. And then it's taking time to really think about that answer without rushing to judgment or rushing to some kind of a solution without really considering that. And that is a key piece about taking care of your people. If you don't understand as a leader that you have to take care of your people first, right? You take care of your people and they take care of the mission. The second thing, and we don't cover the second part in the grit factor, the first piece we do, right? Teams, active listening, that is absolutely part of deep engagement in the present. The second thing you've got to do, and I'm going to borrow a little bit from that deep engagement in the present, the third piece of the grit factor, is the mindset of grounded optimism. You have got to set a vision which is realistically optimistic, right? So it's a stretch. You are constantly optimistic. You are constantly encouraging, but that doesn't mean that you don't pay attention to the real challenges that you're facing and your people are facing as well. So you've got to set that vision, keep them moving towards that vision, and continue to communicate early, communicate often, especially in a remote environment, right? Those employees that are the most engaged, and the studies have shown this over the last 18 months when we're in this hybrid and remote environment, are those who have had one-on-one communication from their immediate superior every week. It can be a text message, it can be a phone call, it can be a Zoom call, but they've had one-on-one communication with their immediate superior. And that's really important. And it's easy to forget to do, right? Because we get caught up in our own stuff or strategy or finances or something else. But as a leader, you cannot fail. You have to be an active listener, and you have to communicate and set that vision.
Yeah, I hear that. So leader on one side, they need to be very courageous, visionary, like almost like a fearless, even though he had to handle here inside himself. But on the outside, a very humble person. It's a person, it's just like you mentioned about Alison Devine. It's like leader lift others people up. It's not leader, it's not always in the front pulling people. Leader might be behind, like supporting, help people grow. That's when you make your team shine, you are the inspiring leader.
Yes. Set that vision and take care of your team. Those are the two big pieces. And that taking care of your team is the entire part 2 of the deep engagement in the present of the grit factor. So it's powerful stuff, and it's accessible as well, I think. But there are hard decisions that a leader has to be willing to make. And I just listened to an excellent podcast interview with Doug Conant of Campbell's Soup, and he's sort of famous for writing 30,000 thank you notes over the course of his career, which I just think is excellent. I mean, we should all aspire to such things. But he understood about taking care of people, but he also understood when he came into Campbell's Soup that the system was broken. Things were not working. They were kind of living decades in the past. And he worked really hard to retain people, but he had to turn over 300 out of 350 senior leaders. You can bet there's a lot of people that weren't happy about that. But ultimately, they increased their performance massively. They increased employee engagement massively, but he had to be willing to make the hard decisions. And that's something else that there's far too few leaders willing to make the hard decisions, and they've got to be done. That's part of what a leader does. It's a lonely job. It's a hard job. And you're right. Sometimes you lead from the front. Sometimes you lead from behind. It's always about your people. It's always about communication, but it's also setting that vision and making the hard decisions as they need to be made.
Wow. I think there's so much lesson that people can take away from today's episode. But unfortunately, we are running out of time. So would you please tell people how they can go find out more about your book and about your speaking?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. You can find me online at shannonpolson.com. That's Polson, or at thegritinstitute.com. And there's anything you want there on my speaking, on the leadership journeys that I do with large corporate groups, and of course the Grit Factor in my first book, North of Hope. So I'd love to opportunity to work with any of your listeners on these aspects of grit, resilience, storytelling, and leadership.
Thank you, Shannon. And I'll make sure all those things will be in the show notes, so people don't worry if you didn't take it down. And thank you so much, Shannon, for today's lessons. And I learned a lot, and I hope everyone who is listening, you are taking away important lessons on how to become an inspiring leader, how to build grit in your leadership, in your team. Thank you, everyone, and see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Journey with Lay. What's your most valuable takeaway from today's episode? What is one step that you are inspired to take? Start tapping into your power of excitement and become the leader you are always meant to be. If you dare to dream it, you can achieve it. Go to journeywithlay.com or email hello@journeywithlay.com. We'll see you again next week.